The old cowboy dug slower than he used to, each shovel of dirt heavier than the last, not because the soil was stubborn, but because his heart was. The grave lay on a small rise overlooking a forgotten stretch of prairie, where the wind never seemed to rest, and the sky always felt too big for one man to face alone. By the time the sun slipped low and bled orange across the horizon, his hands were blistered, his breath shallow, and his eyes wet with memories he had no strength left to bury. Elias Crow had come out here to finish something, or maybe to end something. The wooden marker beside the fresh mound already bore a name carved by his own trembling hand: Mary Crow. Beneath it, he placed his hat for a moment, bowing his head not in prayer. He'd done too much wrong in his life to believe God still listened, but in quiet apology. "I'm sorry I took so long," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry timber. "I reckon I was afraid of being alone." Mary had been gone nearly a year now. Fever took her in the winter, the kind that burned through a person quick and left nothing behind but silence. Elias had tried to save her, rode 2 days through snow to fetch a doctor, but he'd come back too late. He always did. After that, the ranch had turned hollow. The horses went untended, the house echoed, and the nights were unbearable. So he sold the land cheap, packed what little he owned, and told himself he'd dig this grave before riding off into nowhere. The wind shifted. Dark clouds began gathering over the plains, low and heavy, like trouble looking for a man who deserved it. Elias wiped his brow and leaned on the shovel. "Just my luck," he muttered. "Storm on my last day." He turned to fetch his coat from the horse when he heard it, faint but unmistakable, a cry. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him. Then it came again, sharper this time, a child's voice. Elias froze. There were no towns for miles, no ranches, no reason a child should be out here, especially with a storm rolling in fast. His first instinct was to ignore it. He'd lived long enough to know the world didn't offer second chances freely. But something inside him, a part he thought buried alongside Mary, refused to stay quiet. He followed the sound toward a shallow ravine where scrub brush bent low against the rising wind. There, huddled beneath a torn canvas, was a boy no older than 10. His clothes were soaked, his face pale with fear, arms wrapped tight around himself as if trying to hold the world together. Elias knelt slowly. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The boy looked up, eyes wide and glassy. "They're cumin' back," he whispered. "Who's cumin' back?" The boy swallowed. "The men." Thunder rolled across the sky, close enough to rattle Elias's bones. He glanced back toward the open prairie, then at the dark clouds swallowing the sun. "Son," Elias said, "what's your name?" "Samuel," the boy replied. "Pa told me to hide, said if I didn't come back by sundown." To keep hidin'. Something tightened in Elias's chest. "Where's your PA now?" Samuel shook his head, tears finally spilling free. "They took him." Elias didn't need to ask who they were. The frontier had plenty of men who lived by the gun and left nothing but grief in their tracks. He'd been one of them once, long before Mary, before regret, before the nights got quiet enough to hear his own conscience screaming. The first drops of rain began to fall. Elias stood, lifting Samuel into his arms with surprising strength. "All right," he said firmly. "You're cumin' with me. To where?" the boy asked, clutching his coat. Elias hesitated. He'd sold the ranch, packed his life away, dug his final grave. There was nowhere left to go. But as lightning split the sky and the storm descended in full, Elias realized the truth with a heavy breath. Maybe the grave he'd dug wasn't meant for Mary. Maybe it was meant for the man he used to be. He mounted his horse, Samuel pressed close against him, and turned back toward the ranch one last time, money-aware that the storm chasing them carried more than rain. It carried a reckoning. And somewhere behind them, in the dark, riders were already following. The ranch house emerged through the curtain of rain like a ghost. One lamp still hung by the porch, unlit, swaying in the wind. Elias dismounted quickly and ushered Samuel inside. The door groaned as it shut, sealing out the storm but not the dread that followed them in. "Sit by the fire," Elias said. The ranch house emerged through the curtain of rain like a ghost. One lamp still hung by the porch, unlit, swaying in the wind. Elias dismounted quickly and ushered Samuel inside. The door groaned as it shut, sealing out the storm but not the dread that followed them in. "Sit by the fire," Elias said, his voice a low rumble as he struck a match. "Sit by the fire," Elias said, his voice a low rumble as he struck a match. The flame caught, and warm light pushed back the shadows, dancing across the small, tense room. Samuel obeyed, shivering, his eyes never leaving the rain-streaked window. "Pa said men like them don't stop," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Elias didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the rifle mounted above the mantelpiece, an old friend he'd sworn he would never touch again. Mary had made him promise. She'd said that gun had already taken too much from him, that it was a relic of a life best forgotten. But Mary was gone, and the world hadn't softened a bit in her absence. With a heavy sigh, he took the rifle down. "Your pa," Elias said quietly, his hands moving with a familiar, chilling efficiency as he loaded the chamber. What kind of man was he? Samuel thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. He fixed wagons. He didn't like fighting. He always said keeping your hands clean mattered. Elias felt those words like a blade. Keeping your hands clean. He wondered what Samuel would think if he knew the truth, that the man standing before him had once made his living doing the exact opposite. That his hands were stained with things soap and water could never wash away. A flash of lightning lit up the room, illuminating the world outside for a brief, stark instant. And in that instant, Elias saw it. Movement. Horses. 3 of them. Dark shapes circling the house, slow and patient, like wolves stalking their prey. Elias cursed under his breath. "Stay here," he told Samuel, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And no matter what you hear, you stay down." The knock came before he even reached the door. It was a sharp, demanding sound. "Evenin', old-timer," a voice called out, smooth and cold as a river stone. "Storm's getting nasty. We figured we'd ask for shelter." Elias opened the door just enough to see them. 3 men, their slickers dripping with rain, their hands resting low on their holstered guns, ready. The one in the front smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only a predatory gleam in his eyes. "We're looking for a man," the stranger continued. "And his boy." Elias's grip tightened on the rifle hidden behind the door. "Ain't seen no one," he said, his voice even and steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside him. The man's eyes flicked past him, toward the telltale glow of the fire. His smile faded. "That's a shame," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "'cause we're not the patient type." In one swift, fluid motion, Elias raised the rifle. The shot cracked through the storm, a sound that split the night. One rider fell from his horse, the others scattered, instantly returning fire. Bullets tore through the thin wooden walls and shattered the glass of the window as Elias slammed the door shut, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. He barred the door and turned to Samuel, who stared at him with a mixture of terror and awe. "Down," Elias barked, pushing the boy behind a heavy oak table. The fight was quick and brutal. Elias moved on pure instinct, every regret stripped away, every lesson from his darker years roaring back to life. He wasn't a rancher anymore. He was something else, something older and far more dangerous. When the smoke finally cleared, 2 men lay wounded in the mud outside. The third had fled, a coward vanishing into the rain-soaked darkness. Silence descended upon the small house, broken only by Samuel's ragged sobs. Elias knelt beside him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You all right, son?" Samuel nodded, then whispered, his voice trembling, "You're not like them." Elias swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. He wished that were true. At dawn, the storm finally broke. Gray light crept over the ravaged land, revealing the damage. Elias stepped outside, his boots sinking into the thick mud, and found the wounded men gone. Drag marks led away into the tall grass. They'd live, which meant they'd talk, and they'd be back. Elias returned inside and began packing. Food, blankets, and every last round of ammunition he had. Samuel watched him, his young face etched with confusion. "Are we leaving?" the boy asked. Elias nodded grimly. "They'll be back, and they'll bring more men next time. Where will we go?" Where will we go? Elias hesitated, then spoke a name he hadn't uttered in a decade. "Red Hollow." Samuel frowned. "What's there?" "A chance," Elias replied, his voice low, "and a debt." Red Hollow was an old mining town that had turned into a refuge for outcasts. Run by a former sheriff named Thomas Hale. He was the one man who knew Elias's past and hadn't turned him in. Elias had saved Hale's life once, a long time ago. Now, he prayed that favor still counted for something. As they rode out, with the morning sun casting long shadows behind them, Samuel finally asked the question Elias had been dreading. "Why did you help me?" Elias stared ahead, his eyes fixed on the distant, hazy horizon. "Because once," he said softly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "I was the man who took someone's PA away." Samuel went quiet, processing the weight of that confession. By nightfall, the faint, flickering lights of Red Hollow appeared in the distance, a beacon of hope. But as they drew closer, Elias's blood ran cold. He saw smoke, thick black smoke rising into the twilight sky, and then he heard it, the distant, unmistakable echo of gunfire. His heart sank. The storm had brought him a second chance, a chance to be a better man. But it wasn't done testing him yet. Not by a long shot. The first thing Elias Crow noticed was the smell of smoke. Not the wild, clean kind that drifted through the pines after a summer lightning strike. This was different. This was the bitter, acrid smell of human conflict. Burning wood. Burning roofs. Burning lives. Red Hollow, the small town he'd been riding toward with his last, fragile piece of hope, was already under attack. Gunfire cracked through the stillness of the night, sharp and sporadic. Horses, trapped and terrified, screamed in a way that tore at his soul. Shadows danced and rushed across the main street as men shouted orders and curses. their voices swallowed by the growing chaos. The flickering firelight licked at the weathered wooden buildings, turning the once peaceful town into a scene straight out of a forgotten hell. Elias slid off his horse, his movements weary but sure. He reached up and lifted Samuel down, his hands gentle on the boy's small frame. Samuel's face was pale in the demonic glow, but his eyes were wide and sharp, taking in everything. He was too young for this. "Stay behind the water trough," Elias said, his voice low but firm. He gripped Samuel's shoulders, making sure the boy understood. "No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, don't come out." "What about you?" Samuel asked, his voice trembling, a child's fear cutting through the noise. Elias managed a small, tired smile, the kind of smile men give when they've already calculated the cost and accepted it. "I'm exactly where I need to be." With that, he stepped out from the relative safety of the shadows and into the fiery street. The heat washed over him, a dry, suffocating wave. And then, a familiar voice cut through the chaos, dripping with a mocking disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned." Elias turned slowly, every muscle in his body tensing. There, standing near the saloon's swinging doors, was Caleb Rourke. His long coat flapped in the hot wind, and a revolver hung loosely in his hand, casual and deadly. The fire painted his scarred face in cruel, shifting light. This was a man Elias had once called brother. A man he should have stopped long, long ago. "Storms do funny things," Caleb said, his voice a low growl. "Sometimes they bring ghosts back from the dead." Elias raised his rifle, the weight of it familiar and grounding in his hands. "This ends tonight, Caleb. Let the town go. Let the boy's father walk free." Caleb laughed, a hard, hollow sound that held no joy, only jagged edges. "You don't get to play righteous now, Elias, not you. You built this life right alongside me." "I walked away," Elias said, his voice steady despite the thunder in his chest. "That's the difference." The shooting started again, fast and brutal, erupting all around them. Men loyal to Caleb took aim, and Elias moved like a phantom. A man who had buried his fear years ago in a shallow, unmarked grave. Every step was deliberate. Every shot he fired carried the weight of a lifetime of wrong choices, each one begging to be answered by this single, right one. Men fell, others, seeing the tide turn with this one determined ghost, broke and fled into the darkness. The chaos slowly subsided, the symphony of violence fading until only one sharp note remained, and then it was just Elias and Caleb, facing each other in the middle of the burning street. The fire crackled and hissed, the only sound as the town held its breath, waiting. "You could have been a king," Caleb sneered, his confidence unmasked for the desperation creeping into his eyes. Elias steadied his aim, his gaze unwavering. "I'd rather be decent." The final shot echoed into a sudden, profound silence. Caleb Rourke stumbled backward, his body hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. His eyes were wide, staring up at a sky he'd never once bothered to look at. Elias dropped to one knee, the adrenaline finally giving way. The pain came late, a deep, burning fire in his side. He looked down and saw the dark stain of blood soaking through his coat. He pressed a hand to the wound, breathing through the sharp agony as footsteps rushed toward him. Thomas Haylolder, grayer, but still standing, knelt beside him, his face etched with worry and a grudging respect. "You stubborn son of a gun," he muttered, his voice rough with emotion. "You always did choose the hard road." Elias smiled faintly, the effort costing him. It was the only road that ever felt right. They found Samuel's father alive in the jailhouse, bruised, shaken, but breathing. The moment the cell door swung open, Samuel ran into his arms, sobbing with a relief so pure it was almost painful to watch. Elias turned his face away, granting them their reunion, a private moment of grace in the aftermath of so much destruction. By morning, the last of the fires had been extinguished. Red Hollow, though scarred and battered, still stood. Elias spent weeks healing. The days were slow, the nights long. He didn't just lie in bed, he became a part of the town's recovery. He helped mend fences, his hands once used to holding a gun, now learning the rhythm of a hammer. He repaired roofs and sat on the general store porch, telling stories to the town's children's stories that carefully left out the killing but always kept the lessons. Samuel followed him everywhere, a small, devoted shadow. He listened to Elias's words as if each one were a precious stone, something to be treasured. One evening, as his strength fully returned, Elias walked out of town to the small rise overlooking the plains. The sky was a masterpiece of gold and red as the sun sank low on the horizon. He began to dig, but this time, it wasn't for a grave. He planted a single wooden post deep in the earth. Then, with steady hands, he took out his knife and carved into the wood. The words were simple: "Here lies the man who ran." Elias removed his hat and bowed his head, the prairie wind cool on his face. "Rest now," he whispered to the ghost he had finally laid to rest. "You're done." When he turned back, he saw the warm lights of the town glowing in the twilight. He could hear the distant sound of laughter. And then, a boy's voice, clear and strong, carried on the wind, calling his name. The storm that had chased him for so long finally rolled far away, fading into memory. Elias Crow walked toward the light, toward the sound of his name. He walked home not as the man he was, but as the man he had, at long last, chosen to be. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales of redemption and the human spirit. Until next time.